Issue 122. Eggman manipulates the escaped prisoners from the Dracon Empire into thinking he's a good, peaceful ruler and Sonic's evil, saying that a picture of Supersonic they probably got from a spy camera with extreme close-up close to the ground is Sonic's true form. That makes sense. He says that the people of Mobius are too afraid to speak a word against Sonic. It'd be a bit of a twist if these guys ended up spotting Super and going after him instead. But once again, these guys shouldn't trust Eggman because he intentionally made it so that he has evil black and red eyes. The purple guy agrees to it while ignoring what his friend thinks, and they go to Emerald Hill Zone through a warp ring, with the blue guy Hobson saying they'll only get into more trouble by helping Eggman. He comes off as a dumb oaf, but he seems to be saying the smart thing here. The purple guy, Choi, is doing this because he wants to get rich like a selfish jerk so he can never work again. Well, I understand that, but he's going to get a lot worse. And when Sonic shows up, Choi can't fight because of a sudden cramp from his old wound. Something that he says happens a lot. I guess it'd be too dark and depressing to learn where that old wound came from. The blue guy gets a hit on Sonic because he underestimated him as slow and stupid, and his hit just gets absorbed by the fat in his chest, even though you'd think it'd still have pain receptors, and it gets bounced off it into some barrels. After Sonic defeats them, they decide to go back through the warp ring with the purple guy planning to try and make their loss sound like a success. How? How could they do that? Idiot. The story ends with Sonic dismissing Eggman as desperate for hiring them. In the next story, Porker gets mistaken for an Oscar guy in the special zone, with only one of the cops having the reasonable instinct that he doesn't look like much trouble. After the cops try to get Knuckles to come with them to the station, he decides to leave with Porker to avoid abandoning him, and we find out from the Chaotix, who was told that by the cops, that Oscar was one of the Hammerhead gang years before the Chaotix arrived in the city. So wait, well, first off, the Chaotix arrived in the city, they didn't always live there, and second, this reminded me that the Chaotix aren't wanted by the police anymore, which I'd forgotten about because they never actually showed me how they cleared their names. So I totally forgot that, let's just sweep that under the rug. After SPO doesn't flat out tell Charmy why no one wants him around, which doesn't make any sense because he hates him, Knuckles asks Porker why he ran, since he assumes from his lack of social experience that they could have talked to the police and sorted everything out, as if they believed them. Again, someone socially isolated his whole life would realistically become the opposite of trusting. Trust is something you learn. Porker says that he just panicked and couldn't bear to be locked up. Maybe it's also because it would remind him of when he was captured by the Metzelix for a month, which had led to him having a breakdown and ditching the Freedom Fighters. But he's not gonna mention that as a motive. The story ends with Porker being mistaken for Oscar by an old criminal friend of Oscar's, and pushing aside Knuckles to talk to him. We start out the next story with some humans watching a cooking show on TV, and the celebrity guest is Tails, who says he can make a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Well, God forbid we get to see him maybe being a cooking prodigy, because maybe that's what he's a genius in? No, he just makes peanut butter and jelly sandwiches like a typical kid. Then the chocolate muffin they're making starts swelling out of control, and Tails flies while pulling people out of it, and he explains later that the pudding mix must have been sabotaged. Oh, it looked like a muffin. Then some Mobians from another TV channel show up, blaming the chef for stealing their cream and ruining the recipe. Then another TV chef says that those Mobians have put mushy peas in his oven glove. As I hope that this is all being recorded for the audience back home, a food fight starts between the chefs, with Tails warning them that they've been set up. One of the chefs asks where one of them, called Gary, went, and Tails flies over to Gary in his show, who immediately says that he was supposed to have been submerged in chocolate pudding. Why would he admit this so quickly and on live TV? He says that he sabotaged the other cookery shows to stay the #1 chef on TV, and hits Tails with a spoon, calling him a freaky tailed fox. Wow, I guess he's gonna edit the TV footage later to avoid airing that PR ruining confession. But he still did it in front of a scared audience. Tails is knocked into some yellow cooking ingredient and flies out of it, with Gary being fired. I'm glad it wasn't Eggman who was the villain this time. I mean, what motive would he even have for doing all this? In the next story, Amy asks Johnny from the other side of a camera in Techno's workshop why they don't see him much these days. Again. He says that he's just been busy fighting badniks in other zones separate from them. But since this is the second lame excuse for him being missing for a while, I'm sure there's a better meta explanation for why he's being pushed out of focus and not shown much anymore. I heard this bland character isn't exactly popular to begin with. Sonic asks him if he needs any help calling him old buddy, reminding him that he can be there in seconds with his speed, and he says that because it's been quiet the last few days, Eggman must be up to something by now. Over on Flicky's island, Eggman asks Agent X if the mission went as planned, and is told that nobody suspects a thing. He asks if he or she planted the Doom Seed in the right place, and someone in a cloak says that pretty soon Metropolis won't know what hit it, as we see a strange-looking fat green carrot behind him. After we see someone who literally has the last name of Grumpy refusing to give a neighbor back his bowl and bragging about his lawn, he sees the growing weed vine from the green carrot in his lawn and complains that his backyard is ruined. Techno tells Sonic about the report of the giant weed, and Sonic cuts the vine, threatening him with a spin dash. When Gilbert complains about hitting his strawberry patch, Sonic lampshades, "Hey, don't bother thanking me for saving your life, will ya?" And the weed spreads all over the city in giant vines. The story ends with Techno, Amy, and Sonic surrounded by vine weeds. Eggman lampshades they had always wanted a green environment, and now they got more than they bargained for. This is like the Krutzu from Archie, if it didn't possess machinery to become a bigger, more creative threat. The first two stories were by Nitro Kitching, and had Sonic easily defeat the manipulated escaped prisoners of the Dracon Empire in a fight and force sympathetic idiots to retreat. It was interesting that the stupid-looking one is the reasonable one, while the purple guy is the dumb villain who just wants to get rich off capturing Sonic. The second story has Porker and Knuckles run from the cops, and Porker get mistaken for Oscar the criminal again by an old criminal friend of his. The last two stories are by Lou Stringer, and the third one's about the #1 chef sabotaging cooking shows, and Tails getting a confession out of him from surprise at seeing him ridiculously easily, which should have logically happened. That was contrived. And the fourth one's about Metropolis being overwhelmed by weeds thanks to Eggman and Agent X because they want to spite the people there. The Krutzu was more creative, and it showed up in like issue 1 of Archie Sonic.